Now let's take a look at how groups form. A person's social identity includes the we component of the self. It includes the shared characteristics, groups, roles, and relationships of someone's identity. Social identity is created through a combination of the social structures of a society and based on an individual's identity. Who a person is in social situations makes up their social identity. These identities help us understand who we are and where we fit in with other people, but they can have a negative side as well. They can lead to in-group favoritism and out-group discrimination and exclusion. So how does one's group membership become part of their self-concept? Social identity theory proposed in the late 1970s suggests this happens through two processes. Social categorization occurs when we categorize, classify, and label ourselves and others. This process is automatic, unconscious, and happens very quickly. Social identification occurs when we come to think of our groups as extensions of ourselves and base our sense of self on the group's quality. The more we identify with a group, the more important that group is to us. Social identity theory also proposes that we have emotional reactions to the failure and the success of our groups. This is because our self-esteem is tied to the performance of our groups. When our groups do well, we tend to associate ourselves with the accomplishments, the successes of our groups. We call this basking in reflected glory. We also tend to distance ourselves from our groups when they fail, when they perform poorly. We call this cutting off reflected failure. We like to be associated with our group when it's doing well, but not when it's not doing well. Our social identity then impacts how we categorize other people. People who appear to be part of our group or groups are called in-group members. The people who do not appear to be part of our group are called out-group members. Unfortunately, in-group and out-group members don't always get along, and there are sometimes conflicts that emerge. For example, our different social identities encourage in-group favoritism. This occurs when we see members of our in-group as better than members of the out-group. In the graphic on the slide, you can see two different groups, us versus them. Even though the castles, the boats are the same on both sides, the way that we tend to label and think about our group is usually in a positive manner, whereas we often think of the other group, the they, in negative terms. Our castle is where our glorious leader lives. Their castle is where the wicked despot lives. Our religion is great. Their religion is primitive superstition. Some research suggests that some people are more susceptible to in-group favoritism, more likely to fall prey to this bias. People who are low in openness to experience, or people who are low in agreeableness. As you might imagine, this us versus them mentality contributes to intergroup conflict, and also conflict within individuals. An example is social identity threat or stereotype threat. This is the belief that other people are going to negatively evaluate you on some dimension because you are associated with a certain group. For example, A stereotype in the United States is that girls in elementary school are not as good at math as boys. This isn't the case, but the stereotype persists. Young girls then may be nervous or anxious about taking a math test because they know that other people think they aren't good at taking math tests. The problem with this threat is that it can actually decrease performance. This threat can make it more difficult for these girls to take the math test and might actually impact their grades on the test, more so than girls who are not reminded or not told about this stereotype. While it's important for people to form groups and have social connections, the way that people think about their groups can negatively impact their own attitudes and behaviors toward people in their own group and people in other groups. In the next few parts of this lecture, we're going to cover roles, norms, social status, group size, and cohesion, and how all of these factors relate to individuals' performance and the group's performance.